I'm just gonna talk a little bit so the microphone can pick it up correctly. And my glasses are a little bit dirty. Yeah. Alright. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. I think I am ready. Let me just drink a little bit of protein. So, let's start with this. There. I've had this notebook for about, 7 years? And I've been writing some wacky stuff over the years. And seriously, sometimes I'm thinking even like, maybe I'll just shoot some of that stuff. When I have $50 million budget. What's up guys, it's Jonah the Utopian Wanderer and welcome to a new episode. And this time, we're just gonna go a little bit back to my last video, which is Volontaires Sans Frontières, which I filmed while I was in a hostel back in Buenos Aires, back in 2019, where all that COVID stuff was just not existent, basically. So why I wanna make that video? Because while I was editing that documentary, I was realizing some things that I could have done, and you would have guessed I didn't do, that would have helped me so much in making the documentary that I really wanted to make. And you know, it wasn't my first documentary. I had done a few others back in Rio de Janeiro. And even though I did those documentaries, there are things that still either I did not know or I knew and I did not apply while making Volontaires Sans Frontières, which actually is worse. So I thought, you know what, now that I've sort of pinpointed 5, 6 things that I know I could have done better, let me make a video and share what I've learned with you guys so that you as maybe beginner filmmakers, beginner documentary makers can learn from that and apply those things. And you know, some of those things I actually learn also watching other videos on YouTube from other filmmakers, established documentary filmmakers. And I'll link their account below so you can go and check it out by yourself. And trust me, their videos are treasure trove of knowledge that I know are gonna help me and therefore will be helping you as well. But the reason why I'm also making this video is because I have the perspective of a beginner filmmaker. What I'm learning on the fly, you guys can learn on the fly as well. These are not things that I've learned like years ago. These are things I'm learning right now and I want to share right now with you guys. So without further ado, let's just kick things off with the very first item on the list, which happens way before you actually want to start making a documentary, which is knowing your gear. Know everything there is to know about your gear. Know what your gear can do, but even more important, what it cannot do. Because you don't want to end up in a situation where you want to film something in a specific way and realize your gear does not allow you to do that. And you have to scramble to find a plan B, where in fact the plan A should have been sufficient if you had known your gear. And I am guilty of that. For example, there are some low-light situations I was trying to film with my GoPro Hero 7. And though it's an amazing camera and way better than the Hero 3 that I used to have, in very low-light situations, it's just not up for the job. Simple as that. And I ended up with B-roll shot like that. If I had known that the GoPro couldn't do that, I would have picked up my A7 III, which would have been way better. So that's my first advice to you, know your gear. And this rule applies to absolutely everything that you have, not just your camera, your microphone, your lights if you have them as well. Everything. Because ultimately your gear needs to help you tell the story that you want to tell. It should not be a blockage, it should not be an obstacle. And that leads me to my second point, which is plan the story. Know the story that you want to write. You know, a story is something very basic. An initial situation, an end situation, and things that happen in between that go from point A to point Z. And that's your job, to actually tell what's happening in between those 2 points, but also highlight the fact that there's an initial state and an end state. Think about all of those things. Think about how your story is going to progress. What characters are going to be part of your story. You have to identify your characters very easily when you make up your story, because if you don't do that, your audience isn't going to know as well when they're going to be watching the story. And that's something I was guilty of when doing Volontaires Sans Frontières, because I had so many different characters, all the volunteers of the hostel, and even then, not all of them. And because I didn't spend that much time knowing their own story, their own conflicts for some of those people, then when you watch a documentary, I love that documentary because of the emotional impact that it's had on me making that story. But at the same time, I'm objective enough to realize that there are some characters that just pop in at the very beginning and then they just completely disappear for the rest of the story. And people watch that, they think those people are gonna be the main characters and then they just disappear and you're left wondering like, what happened? Know that even before you start shooting. Some people actually shoot the documentaries and then they figure out the story as they go along. But it requires a lot of experience that right now I don't have. So I'd rather just focus on doing things by the book, if you can call it that way, so that I know at least I'm gonna tell a coherent story that's gonna make sense, not just to me, but to the people who are gonna be watching it. And you know, there are different tools for that. Like I said, I'm just gonna copy paste some of those down below. But another one is a book that I have, and I haven't read all of it just yet. It's called The Writer's Journey by Christopher Vogler, and that applies to fictional stories. But documentary stories follow the same pattern, ultimately. And that leads me to my third point, which is having characters. You need to have engaging characters. Because if you don't have engaging characters, if your characters are just living like a 9-to-5 type of life, just like pretty much everyone else, then people are just gonna think that they're living a normal life just like theirs, and it's not worth watching it because it's just gonna be like, I already know that story, I'm living it. So instead, find their conflict. And when I say conflict, it doesn't mean that they're gonna have to fight someone or just fight the system or something like that. No, a conflict has to be sort of, let's just put it like that, an obstacle on their way from point A to point Z, like I said. Those characters need to have something that they want to achieve. And the small things that are gonna get in their way of getting to that point, that's what we're gonna call the conflict. If the conflict is not there, then their story is not engaging, their story is not out of the ordinary. And so for someone who's gonna be watching the story, there's not gonna be any incentive to continue the story if there's not something that's gonna hook them to those characters. Volontaires Sans Frontières, there's some points here and there of conflict when I talk about people leaving the hostel, and then there's gonna be a change, and how do you adapt to that change, and so on. But if I had known my characters and prepared their stories better, then that would have translated much better into the final video, into the final documentary. But I didn't do that. Now my next point is when you're actually doing the filming. You probably have heard that if you've already done some videos and seen some YouTube videos as well on the subject, is shoot a lot of B-roll. You're never gonna have too much B-roll, trust me on that, unless all your memory cards are full. Then yeah, in that case, buy memory cards. Shooting too much B-roll is not a thing, because trust me, you'd rather have too much B-roll to put on your timeline when you're editing than not enough and realize that someone is talking about something and I don't have enough footage, or I do have footage actually, but I have to copy paste it twice or thrice. If you watch the documentary Volontaires Sans Frontières, you realize there's some sequences that appear 2 times, and you want to avoid that because people are going to end up with a sentiment of déjà vu, like, well, I already seen that. And worse, if some character is talking about something very specific, there's 2 choices there. Either you just show the character talking about it, but then your audience is going to be like, I wish I would know what it looked like. Or you put a footage that does not fit with what the person is talking about, and then the audience is going to be like, this makes no sense. So you see, there's no winning situation here. The only winning situation is if you shoot enough B-roll, and even more important, when you're doing interviews with people and they're talking about, like I said, something specific, then put a note down that you have to shoot B-roll for that thing, even if you have to direct people to make it happen. Because ultimately, I mean, I know documentary filmmaking, and that's sort of my ideal is I'm a fly on the wall. I'm just watching things happen as they happen. But sometimes there are some elements, especially when someone talks about those things, that you want to see, you want to show that. Unless you actually direct people, it's never going to happen. So you're never going to film it, and you're never going to have the footage to show that. You have to step out of your comfort zone sometimes and not necessarily be a fly on the wall, but just give that little nudge so that what you want to see, what you want to show actually happens. Because if you don't do that, then it's a missed opportunity. And your documentary is a little bit weaker because of that. And finally, my last point that I want to raise, because I already raised like 5-6 points and I don't want to overwhelm you with too much stuff at the same time. And like I said, there's more down below if you want to keep progressing further. But my last point for you guys is don't wait to do two things when you're shooting a documentary. Don't wait to transcribe your text, what is being said in your videos, because you'll be thankful, so thankful. Your future self is gonna be so thankful that you did that, because when you're shooting an interview that goes for like 20, 30, 40 minutes, there's a lot of things that are being talked about. Transcribing, which is just the act of opening a document, a Word document or something like that, and just writing down at least the key points, key phrases that are being said during that interview, during that video, and then linking those two together. That way, when you're in the editing room, you know exactly what this thing talks about. And you don't have to search and sift through 40 minutes of interview trying to find the thing like, did he actually talk about that? But if it's transcribed, at least you can find it so much more easily. Number two is don't wait to edit. And there's two good reasons for that. The first one is very obvious. Like Volontaires Sans Frontières, again, same example. I shot that back in April, May 2019. And I released the video last week, August 2020. Over a year between shooting it and editing it. And the big problem here is that, of course, I didn't transcribe, you would have guessed that. Therefore, when I was watching the footage, I didn't remember what was being said. So I had to go through everything over again, like 200 gigs worth of footage. Everything over again in order to understand what was being said when, so that I can use that in the video. So that's a lot of wasted time that I could have gained just by at least transcribing. The second reason why you don't want to wait to edit, and that's probably one of the most important ones. When you're telling a story, it's about emotion. If you don't create an emotional link between your audience and the story you want to tell, it's not gonna make an impact and they're gonna forget about it as soon as they close that video. And I'll be honest, unless you were there at the hostel, unless you experienced that, I'm pretty sure that you might find my documentary bland as well. And I'm honest about that. I wish there was a little bit more of an emotional punch to it. But the way to have a better emotional punch is to edit when the emotions are still fresh with you after you filmed it. The more you wait to edit a story that you film, the more the emotional impact that that story had on you is gonna fade away. And if it's faded away, then it's gonna be that much harder to actually translate that into the final video. So that's why you have to edit as soon as you can, while the emotions are still fresh, because you know the emotions and it's that much easier to translate that into the story that you want to tell. And it's so important to do that, because if you miss that mark, maybe that video is not even worth making anymore. I still did Volontaires Sans Frontières because I wanted to be a stepping stone, a learning opportunity for me. And also because I want to pay homage to all those people that I met in that hostel, and that was the best way I could do that. But I know I could have done much better if I had done that work back in May or June 2019, when it was still fresh in my head. And if I had done all of those other things I just mentioned in the video as well. And that's ultimately maybe my last point, is that you're gonna fail. I failed. I failed at making the documentary that was in my head, because I didn't follow those things, because I didn't do that. I know that the final video that I made is not as good as I imagined it to be. And sometimes it pains me, but what's important is that when you fail, like I just did, is to use that, make some new knowledge about those failures, like that list, for example, and apply that next time you're gonna be doing the same thing. Because there's gonna be a next time. That's also super important. Don't give up just because it didn't turn out the way you want it to be. That's the worst disservice that you can do to yourself. So just hop back on that horse and get back to storytelling. So there you go, guys. Those were my 6, 7, I stopped counting. Honestly, I stopped counting, because what matters is not how many pieces of advice that I give, but that hopefully it's good quality enough so that you can use that to make your own stories and to tell other people's stories even, and to realize that there are a lot of things that go into telling good stories on film. I hope that those pieces of advice help you. And like I said, if you want to go further, I'll just put below some other YouTubers, filmmakers, documentary filmmakers that are really well established, and just go in, check out their videos, and don't hesitate to subscribe them. Also, don't hesitate to subscribe to my own channel as well, because like I said, you can be assured, you can rest assured that whatever I'll be learning on the fly, I will want to share that with you guys. So if you want to follow me on my journey and share our journeys together, then don't hesitate to subscribe. That will help me so much. And don't hesitate to put a like as well on that video if you like the content. Happy filmmaking to you guys. Stay safe. That was Utopian Wanderer. signing out.